Money FM 89.3. Best of breakfast. Breakfast Special.
Money FM 89.3, it's Audrey Siek with your breakfast special. The wait and speculation is finally over. Singaporeans are headed to the polls for GE2025 on the 3rd of May, just over 2 weeks from now. Nomination day is scheduled to be on the 23rd of April. Under the advice of Prime Minister Lawrence Wong, Singapore's president dissolved parliament yesterday afternoon and the writ of election was issued. Since then, the ruling People's Action Party, as well as opposition parties like the Workers' Party, have taken to social media to kick this into high gear. Take a listen.
I've assembled a team of dedicated Singaporeans with a heart to serve. We need your support. Let's build a better Singapore for ourselves and all our loved ones.
Singaporeans, they are the true agents of change. I mean, the Workers' Party is just a platform to bring their voices into Parliament. And the true people who have power are the voters, and they control the future.
Well, besides the tempo of this election season, this GE is particularly noteworthy as it will be the first under PM Wong's leadership following his succession from now Senior Minister Lee Hsien Loong. So what's next and what can we expect from now till we head to the polling booths? To help us unpack the legal, political and societal implications of this development, we're joined by Eugene Tan, Associate Professor of Law from the Yong School of Law at Singapore Management University. Good morning, Eugene. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning, Audrey. It's always a pleasure.
Always wonderful having you on the show. So much to unpack today. But let's start with the basics, Eugene. Now that Parliament has officially been dissolved and the election date has been set, what are the immediate next steps in the lead up to polling day? What should Singaporeans be paying attention to?
Well, Audrey, I think there are essentially, 2 or 3 key dates. So a week from today is nomination day. So that is when the candidates, will file their nomination papers. And if they file the papers successfully, then they will be declared candidates. So it's also on this day, that we will know which parties will be contesting against the People's Action Party in, different GRCs and SMCs, right? We'll find out whether there'll be any multi-cornered contests. We may get a sense based on the lineups, which constituencies are going to be keenly contested. And we can expect, a lot of last-minute surprises in terms of candidates being switched, from one constituency to another, at the 11th hour. The second key date, to me would be cooling off day, right? So that will take place on the 2nd of May. And so that's a day where there's no campaigning. I think most Singaporeans would have decided who they want to vote by then. But I think it is a useful pause for Singaporeans, to take a break, a very short break, from the very intense and perhaps even very passionate campaigning, and to then ask themselves the question of who they would like to see as their representative in Parliament, but also, who should form the government. And then, of course, we come to 3rd of May, the big day, polling day. And that's when, Singaporeans will cast their ballots between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m., to determine the composition, of Singapore's 15th Parliament and also, which party will form the government.
Yeah, so you talked about an intense and perhaps passionate campaign period, and we're looking at a pretty fast-paced timeline here, right? Looking at when the boundaries were set to when the writ of election was issued yesterday, and now we're just a week away from nomination day. What's the reason for this whirlwind kind of schedule? Are geopolitical movements responsible for this?
Well, Audrey, we sometimes forget that the 14th Parliament, which was dissolved yesterday, had only about 4 months left, to its term. So in a way, the elections being held this time is not surprising, right? Because the 14th Parliament was actually Singapore's second longest serving parliament. But I suppose, the opposition parties feel that the sort of 1 month interval, right, between the release of the Electoral Boundaries Review Committee report and the dissolution of Parliament, as well as the issuance of the writ of election, that 1 month, right, or so, did not give them enough time to re-strategize, to reorganize, given that there were extensive, electoral boundary changes. But in terms of, the speed, I don't think they are really affected by the geopolitical considerations. Yes, I do know that the PAP leadership has made that point, but as I mentioned earlier, because we are left with 4 months left to the current terms, to the 14th Parliament's term, that elections have to be around this time. But certainly, the geopolitical issues, whether particularly the evolving tariff war, I think that has perhaps, confirmed that this timing is as good as it can be, in terms of getting Singaporeans, to consider, the grave challenges that face Singapore, given that the current world order, the economic system, from which Singapore has benefited significantly from, that could be upended, or some might say, is being upended. And so the need for a mandate, becomes critical.
Okay, so when it comes to the campaign period, Eugene, can you shed some light possibly on the thought process behind how the incumbent decides on how long this period should go for? We understand it's a minimum of 9 days to 55 days for campaigning. That's a pretty long window, and it seems like it's been quite short in recent years.
We have generally kept to, the minimum period for campaigning, right, which is 9 days. I think it's a value judgment, by the PAP government, as to whether we should have a short, medium, or extended electoral campaign. There are pros and cons, in my view, to having a very short campaign. But I suppose, one of the key considerations is that the issues are fairly evident. The policy options, are also evident because, when we talk about issues such as cost of living, or whether it relates to immigration or housing affordability and accessibility, job insecurity concerns, or the international geopolitical situation, the policy options are perhaps quite well known, right? It is then a question for voters to decide which party, they would prefer on all these different issues, or on whatever issue that they find most important to them. So I think there is also the view that an extended campaign could put the country on an unnecessary knife edge. And so, I think a different government, may take a different position as to the length of the campaign period. But 9 days is not unusual. In fact, I would say that it's very much the standard, for Singapore's general elections.
Yeah, so I want to hone in on this a little bit. It's usually 9 days, at least in recent years. So we know that election campaigns here are pretty short and quite regulated. So how do these limitations kind of affect the way all of the different parties connect with voters, especially in this digital and social media-driven age?
Yes, so the 2020 general election, right, held amid the COVID-19 pandemic, in many ways, compelled political parties and candidates, to campaign online. I think, we will see the online platforms, playing a very significant role. Not that they haven't in previous general elections, but that I think their role will be just as important, even though candidates and parties can now engage in face-to-face, in-person campaigning. I think what you're going to see in view of the short campaign period, would be this 24/7 campaign, right? So in a way, voters can always access party platforms, find out more about the party's candidates, their manifesto, the policy proposals that they have, 24/7, right? Because, there will be the websites, there will be the social media platforms, and then there will obviously be, the house-to-house visits, the greeting of voters, at public venues and all. So I think, we will see online campaigning, playing that big part. But I still think that, voters in general, would like to see the candidates vying for their votes in person. Because I think that's where the ability to strike a bond, to better connect, to have a sense of who the person is, who's seeking my vote. That's something which is important. So I think parties need to strike, that balance. Online campaigning is obviously more affordable, but I think ultimately, parties will have to walk both the real ground as well as the virtual ground.
Yeah, and this GE2025 is also especially significant, being the first under PM Lawrence Wong's leadership, and the PAP ruling party will be fielding more than 30 new faces. I believe that's the largest slate in recent years. How might this leadership change kind of shape the tone and dynamics of this election compared to previous ones that we've seen?
Yes, so this is Mr. Lawrence Wong's, first general election, as Prime Minister as well as the leader of the ruling party. So I think we can expect to see, and we have already seen, different approaches, to this election campaign. So one is, the sort of decentralized style of introducing, new candidates or rather candidates that are slated, for the different constituencies. That's still ongoing. But I think, we might see, the other difference, of course, is the significant number of first-time candidates, right? So the ruling party has indicated that there'll be more than 30, even at 30, that's a very significant proportion, of MPs who will be retired. And I think, this is really PM Wong and his party making that conscientious effort, to reach out to younger voters. And here I'm referring to, millennials and Gen Zs. I think there is the view that, and I think it's true, that the younger voters are more receptive to alternative voices in Parliament. And so it becomes even more important, for the ruling party to be able to reach out, to engage with voters, to connect with them. So I think, the campaign is yet to kick off in its full intensity. But I think we can see that parties, whether it's the ruling party or the opposition parties, recognizing that they need to, we take a refreshing approaches, to persuading voters, to vote for them. And I suppose, in the last 4 to 5 years, I think, one significant difference in terms of outreach, could be the use of podcasts, which has worked very well, I think, in elections in other countries. But I think also, during the presidential election in 2023, I think it showed the potential of podcasts because the ability, to engage in extended conversations at any time, depending on when the listener has the time, to listen. I think that's something that perhaps could make that impact, in this general election.
Yeah, so you mentioned some key issues earlier, like cost of living and jobs, maybe housing prices. What do you think are the key issues likely to feature very heavily in this election? Do you think the tariff war is top of mind at all?
Audrey, I think, the tariff war is, to me, not top of the mind, I think, where voters are concerned, but it will certainly be on the minds of voters. I think that's simply because, the tariff war will impact upon Singapore's economy, right? We are so heavily dependent, on exports. But it's not just about exporting, to the US. In any case, the US has a trade surplus with Singapore, meaning that we import more from them than they import from us, But the tariff war, makes for a more uncertain, volatile, perhaps even capricious, economic environment. So what that means is that, not just will price of goods that we use daily go up, but you also create uncertainty as to, whether companies should invest, in countries, even if they're sure that, for example, they want to invest in Singapore, but because of the tariff, the uncertain economic environment, they may not invest as much as they would like to. So I think, the full implications will not be known for a while because, we are looking at the tariff war as something that's still evolving. But it is something that, voters will have to be mindful of, in terms of looking at what policy options the different parties put forth for them. But if I can come, to your question about the other big issues, well, I think, bread and butter issues have always dominated elections, right? Not just in Singapore, but across the entire world. And by bread and butter issues, we're referring here, to cost of living, to housing affordability and accessibility, concerns over job security and wage stagnation. These are ever-present issues. And I think we are in a good place, right, given the help that is given to Singaporeans. But I think that, there is a question of, whether the elections be fought and whether more can be done. More can be done in that front. I do think that, another big issue would be immigration. It's been a long-standing issue, but very carefully discussed and debated, during general elections 2011, 2015, and 2020. But I fear that, in this general election, that issue could come out, in a very big and ugly way, because many parties have indicated that that's something that they want to contest on openly. And I think it's important for parties, to recognize, how they campaign, matters as much as what they're campaigning on. And given that Singapore is in need of immigrants, to augment the population both qualitatively and quantitatively, that this is an issue that requires, serious consideration. And of course, politics doesn't stop at the water's edge. And so I think in this general election, international issues, we mentioned earlier about the tariff war, but I think also issues, such as the conflict in Gaza, while they will not be featured prominently, right, they could affect how voters view the different parties, based on where the parties stand on those issues. So that there is that mixed bag of issues. We all decide our vote based on different considerations, but I think these are some of the headline issues, that Singaporeans will have to ponder, as they consider the different political options before them.
Yeah, so many key issues to watch, especially the on-the-ground issues. And as Singapore gears up for this pivotal election under PM Wong's leadership, it's clear there's a lot more at play than just dates and rules. The next few weeks will be packed with excitement, strategy, and important decisions for the country's future. Eugene, thank you as always for your time and insights today. It's been a real pleasure.
The pleasure is all mine. Thank you. And I'm sure, people will be tuning to Money FM, for all the important updates.
I hope so. Thank you so much, Eugene, for joining us. That was Eugene Tan, Associate Professor of Law from the Yong Pung House School of Law at Singapore Management University. Keep it here on Money FM 89.3.
To listen to more great interviews, download our podcasts at audio.sg or download the audio app. That's AWEDIO, audio at the App Store and Google Play.